The first time anyone saw Lilith was on a cold Monday morning. The sky was dull, gray, and heavy with the promise of rain. The students of Blackwood Middle School huddled together in groups, chattering about the usual gossip: who liked who failed the math test, and what was trending online. No one noticed the girl standing at the gate, watching them with an eerie stillness. Lilith was beautiful, oddly beautiful. Her skin was too pale, like she had never seen sunlight. Her hair cascaded in perfect black waves, and her eyes were unsettling, an unnatural shade of silver that gleamed even in the dull morning light. There was something off about her, something no one could quite explain, but they all felt it. She entered the school with slow, deliberate steps, her black dress barely moving despite the wind. When she passed, conversations stuttered, smiles faltered. A creeping sensation of unease followed in her wake, like a shadow stretching too long behind a body. Alyssa was the queen of the school, popular and perfect in every way. She was the first to approach Lilith. "Hey, are you new?" Alyssa's voice was sweet, but there was an edge to it, like she was assessing the competition. Lilith merely tilted her head, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Yes, that night, Alyssa's mirror cracked on its own. At first, she thought it was nothing, just an accident. But when she looked into the broken reflection, she saw something impossible. Lilith was behind her, but when Alyssa turned around, her bedroom was empty. Then the whispering started, soft, hissing voices that slithered into her ears at night. The whispers knew things, her secrets, her fears, her guilt. They twisted in her mind, weaving nightmares that felt too real. The night before she disappeared, her parents heard her talking to someone in her room. The voice responding wasn't hers. Alyssa stopped coming to school after that. Her parents said she wouldn't stop screaming about the girl in the mirror. Her room was found in disarray, with every mirror shattered. On the largest shard, a single word had been traced in "Dust Lilith." Ben was the class clown, always making jokes at others' expense. He laughed when he saw Lilith, whispering to his friends about how she looked like a vampire. That afternoon, during gym class, he tripped, except there was nothing to trip over. He fell face first into the concrete, breaking 2 teeth. As he lay there, dazed and bleeding, he swore he saw Lilith standing over him, her lips barely moving as she whispered something only he could hear. That night, Ben dreamed of teeth. His own, falling out one by one, replaced by sharp, jagged fangs. But worse, he could feel them growing back, sharper each time. His gums bled endlessly. He woke up to find his pillow soaked in blood, though his mouth was intact. The next day, he transferred schools. He never spoke again. Years later, his parents found his childhood drawings dark, shadowy figures with elongated teeth surrounding a faceless girl. Sophie was quiet, the type to go unnoticed. But Lilith noticed her. One afternoon, Sophie found a folded piece of paper inside her locker. There was no writing, only a single black mark that looked like an eye. That night, Sophie woke up gasping, unable to move. Her room was impossibly dark, her blankets heavy like stone. In the silence, something exhaled against her ear. A wet, rasping breath. Her body convulsed as shadowy fingers pressed into her chest, squeezing her lungs until she thought she would die. She survived the night, but she was never the same. Her parents found her sitting in the closet the next morning, her eyes wide with terror, whispering about shadows that moved when they shouldn't. She never spoke again. Her artwork, once filled with bright colors, became nothing but black, chaotic scribbles, always featuring a pair of silver eyes in the dark. Jake was fearless, or so he thought. He confronted Lilith directly, asking who she really was, what she wanted. Lilith only smiled. That night, he heard something tapping at his window. He lived on the 2nd floor. When he finally gathered the courage to look, he saw her. Lilith standing outside his window, despite the impossible height. Her silver eyes gleamed in the dark, and her mouth twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. He never told anyone what happened next. But in the morning, he was found curled in a fatal position in his bed, muttering the same thing over and over. "She's inside." His fingernails were torn, as if he had been clawing at something unseen in the night. His family moved away soon after, but his younger brother later spoke of hearing whispers at night, whispers that called Jake's name. Emily was the only one who wasn't afraid. She was curious, drawn to Lilith in a way that defied logic. "You're not like the others," Emily said one afternoon. "You're different." Lilith reached out, gently touching Emily's face. "You understand," she whispered. Emily's parents reported her missing the next day. They found her clothes in the woods behind the school, perfectly folded. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just her empty clothes and the lingering scent of something ancient, something wrong. Lilith was gone after that. No one remembered when she left, or if she was even enrolled in the first place. The teachers had no records of her, no photos, no proof she ever existed. But the 5 students she touched would never forget. Because every now and then, in the reflections of windows, in the static of televisions, in the dark corners of rooms where the light didn't quite reach, they would see her. Watching, waiting, smiling, and whispering their names. Laugh now. The curse of Pierrot. I used to think clowns were pathetic. A cheap gimmick for kids. A dying art for washed-up performers who couldn't make it in real theater. I never imagined my words could carry a curse. It started at a run-down traveling circus that set up on the outskirts of town. My friends and I went for laughs, expecting something sad and outdated. The highlight, or rather the lowlight, was a clown named Pierrot, a gaunt, pale-faced performer with exaggerated painted tears and a tattered costume. He tried hard, too hard. His jokes fell flat, his tricks failed, and the kids in the audience barely cracked a smile. When he tripped over his oversized shoes and crashed into a bucket of confetti, I let out a cruel laugh. The laughter spread, and soon the whole audience was jeering. Pierrot's painted frown seemed to deepen. He scanned the crowd, and for a split second, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. That was when I said it, loud enough for him to hear. "Maybe you should quit. Nobody thinks you're funny." Silence. A heavy, awful silence. Pierrot stood frozen, his breath visible in the cold night air. Then, without a word, he turned and shuffled off stage. The next morning, I woke up to grim news. Pierrot, his real name was Elias Moore, had been found hanging from the rafters of the main tent. Suicide, they said. His makeup still streaked his face, his tears no longer painted. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. He was a stranger, a sad clown in a dying circus. Then, the nightmare started. The first night, I dreamed of the circus tent, empty, except for a single spotlight illuminating Pierrot's lifeless body swaying from the rafters. As I watched, his head jerked up, his dead eyes staring at me. His lips parted, and in a strained whisper, he said, "Still think I'm not funny?" I woke up in a cold sweat, my throat raw from screaming. The second night, I woke to the sound of squeaky shoes on my bedroom floor. My breath caught. In the dim glow of the streetlight outside, I saw the faint outline of a hunched figure standing at the foot of my bed. A painted, grinning face. A tear-streaked cheek. Pierrot. I blinked, and he was gone. But he didn't stay gone. Doors creaked open on their own. The faint scent of grease paint and old fabric clung to my sheets. My TV turned on by itself. Flickering static before the screen filled with footage of Pierrot's last performance, his hollow eyes staring straight into mine. One night, my mirror fogged over with no explanation. When I wiped it clean, words had been scrawled. I tried to tell myself it was stress, paranoia, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was being haunted. Pierrot had followed me beyond the grave, and he wanted me to suffer. The worst was the night I truly saw him. I woke up to a whisper, not outside my door, not across the room, right next to my ear. "Why aren't you laughing?" My body went rigid. I could feel breath on my neck. A slow, sickening creak came from the darkness beside my bed. I turned my head, dreading what I already knew I would see. Pierrot was there, inches from my face. His skin was no longer just painted white. It was gray, rotting, stretched too tight over his skull. His lips curled into a broken smile, and his hollow, black eyes held nothing but malice. That was the moment I screamed. That was the moment he lunged. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up hours later, curled in the corner of my room, my fingernails torn and bloody from clawing at the walls. My body ached as if something had held me down. I moved out of my apartment the next day. It didn't help. Pierrot wasn't tied to a place. He was tied to me. I don't sleep much anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the faint squeak of his shoes, the shuffle of his oversized feet. And sometimes, just before dawn, I hear the quietest of whispers, curling through the darkness like smoke. Still think I'm not funny? I tried seeking help. Priests, psychics, paranormal investigators. No one could break the curse. The more I tried to escape, the worse it became. Shadows twisted into his shape, reflections distorted to reveal his grinning face. My phone started ringing at odd hours, the static on the other end broken only by a faint, raspy giggle. Then came the laughter. It started in the distance, an echoing chuckle in empty hallways, an unnatural, high-pitched cackle from the shadows. Soon, it followed me everywhere. In my car, in the grocery store, even in broad daylight, surrounded by people. No one else heard it. Just me. One night, I woke up to find my walls covered in smeared clown makeup. My own hands were stained with red and white paint, my fingernails caked with grease paint. I had no memory of doing it. I was losing myself. I tried staying awake, drowning myself in caffeine and energy drinks, but exhaustion always won. And when it did, Pierrot was waiting. I know there's only one way this ends. He won't stop. He won't leave. I laughed at his misery. Now he's making sure I never stop laughing. I write this as a warning. If you ever go to a rundown circus, if you ever see a pale, sad-faced clown with painted tears and hollow eyes, don't mock him. Don't laugh at his pain, because if you do, he'll come for you next. And this time, he'll make sure you're laughing too. Forever. In a quiet rural village, surrounded by dense forests and whispering winds, stood a house that once belonged to a woman neither too young nor too old. She was known for her beauty and grace, her face often adorned with elegant makeup, her hands always busy tending to her small garden. Then one night she vanished. Her body was found days later, twisted and lifeless, her eyes wide open in a frozen scream, her throat slashed from ear to ear. The village whispered of foul play, but no one dared to speak the truth. And so, time moved on, and the house was left abandoned, crumbling, and forgotten. 10 years passed, and the once lively home became nothing more than a ruin, its wooden walls eaten by termites, its windows shattered by the unforgiving seasons. People passing by shivered, avoiding the place, convinced that something unnatural lurked within. Until one morning, the village awoke to a shocking sight. The house was no longer in disrepair. The yard was swept clean, a neat little garden had been planted, and the air smelled of fresh earth rather than decay. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said they had seen a woman with painted lips and flowing hair, sweeping the yard in the dead of night. Others swore they heard whispers and the faint sound of laughter echoing from within the walls. Newcomers dismissed it as village superstition, but an older group of villagers exchanged knowing glances. They recognized the description of the woman. The dead had returned, but the story ran deeper than any of them dared admit. This was no ordinary ghost, this was the vengeance of the wronged. Among the elders was a group with a sinister past, a coven of witches who had practiced their dark arts in the shadows of the village. They had made sacrifices to maintain their power, feeding on the innocent in secret. But one among them, a mother, had refused to offer her own child to their unholy ritual. Desperate, the coven sought another sacrifice. The woman who once lived in the house had been new to the village, unknowing of the horrors hidden beneath its peaceful facade. One night, she was lured into the dark woods, her breath stolen by ancient chants, her body restrained by unseen forces. The witches held her down, their sharp nails digging into her flesh as they carved symbols into her stomach. Her screams echoed through the trees, but the village remained silent, pretending not to hear. Her blood was collected in bowls, her life essence drained as an offering to the abyss. The witches feasted, their lips stained crimson with her sacrifice. The village kept silent, and the witches thrived. But now, she had come back, and she was smart. One by one, the coven members disappeared. A woman who once walked with a proud gait was found paralyzed in her bed, her mouth sewn shut by invisible hands, her eyes bulging with terror. Another was seen wandering in the woods, whispering to herself, her eyes rolling wildly as if seeing things beyond this world. Blood seeped from the walls of their homes, pooling on their floors in grotesque patterns. The villagers began locking their doors at night, afraid of the shadow moving between the trees, the scent of fresh earth growing stronger each morning. Then, the whispers started. Not the wind, not the leaves, but a voice, soft and sickly sweet. You thought I was forgotten. You thought I forgave. Windows shattered without cause. Shadows lengthened where none should exist. The villagers saw her reflection in their mirrors, staring, watching, waiting. The witches who remained gathered in desperation, calling upon their dark powers to banish what they had created. But it was too late. The house, her house, stood strong and proud, glowing with an eerie light on the night of the full moon. The villagers who dared to look saw a final sight before slamming their doors shut. Woman in her makeup, sweeping her yard with a knowing smile. And behind her, the ghosts of those she had claimed, dragging the last remaining witches into the abyss, their screams swallowed by the darkness. By morning, the house stood abandoned once more, the garden overgrown, the yard untouched. But this time there was blood thick, dark, and fresh streaked across the porch, spelling a single word: revenge. And sometimes, in the dead of night, the villagers still hear the soft sound of a broom sweeping the ground, and the faint laughter of a woman who had outwitted death itself, waiting for the next soul to take her place.